Information radio is AM 1420 KTOE Mankato and FM 102.7 K274AL Mankato.
Good afternoon and welcome to Talk of the Town. Today, a special edition of Talk of the Town with the KTOE State House 19A Candidate Forum. This is sort of edition 2, a second day with all 3 candidates live in studio with us with fresh new questions for this show. Our thanks to Pete Steiner for allowing us to use Talk of the Town for the Candidate Forum. And Talk of the Town is brought to you by Cato Glass.
Shopping for insurance? With Auto Owners Insurance, every policy comes with a local agent providing you with the right coverage to fit your needs. When it comes to insurance, keep it simple. Talk with a real agent. Auto Owners Insurance, highest in customer satisfaction with the auto insurance claims experience 4 years in a row, according to J.D. Power & Associates. For J.D. Power & Associates award information, visit jdpower.com.
See Scott Michaelitz at Cato Insurance, 802 South Front Street. Phone 387-4081.
My name is Wendy Wild. We're delighted to have in studio with us today Alan Quist, the Republican-endorsed candidate running for that 19A House seat, State House seat, Clark Johnson, the DFL-endorsed candidate, and Tim Giesecke, who is endorsed by the Independence Party. And as yesterday, we drew ahead of time to determine the order in which the questions would be answered. And we have 2 questions by local leaders. And then the last question was actually submitted by a KTOE listener. So we are ready. We will, this first question, have Clark Johnson answering first, Tim Giesecke second, and Alan Quist will answer third. And our first question is posed by South Central College President Keith Stover.
Meeting the workforce needs of Minnesota is a core responsibility of Minnesota state colleges and universities. Our graduates are key to the economic growth of communities throughout the state. We deliver on this responsibility by producing graduates who have the foundational and technical skills needed for the work that needs to be done through partnerships with business and industry. During my 14 years at South Central College, the state's share of public 2-year college student cost of education has gone from the Minnesota standard of 2/3 down to 2/5. That is 67% down to near 40%. What can our legislature do to resolve the high cost of tuition caused by this reduction of investment in higher education?
And our first response from DFLer Clark Johnson.
Keith, I appreciate your comments as an employee of MnSCU. I see what we can do for our students and what we can do for Minnesota through public higher education. It's a key component in building a strong Minnesota, but also creating opportunity for thousands of people across the state. It's like a twofer. Individuals benefit and the state itself benefits. I agree with you that the cuts in funding for public higher education have been very significant and very severe. We're basically operating on the budget in MnSCU that we had in 1999. And yet since then, we've added 40,000 students. I think the result is that it's a result of an approach towards the budget over the last 10-plus years in which no new taxes, the pledge for no new taxes has been the guiding principle. And it's resulted in instability and severe cuts in programs, most notably in MnSCU. And the solution to that is to be more responsible with the budget. We need to be responsible to make sure that it's a stable budget. And it's going to mean more revenue. And if we're going to secure more revenue, it's absolutely important that we secure that revenue in a fair way. Fair taxation has a lot of meaning. And finally, I've been arguing that we've got to think towards the future, a future-oriented budget. And nowhere does this play more of a hand, I think, than in public higher education. Because I really believe, at least in my personal experience and the thousands of students I've worked with, that degree from a university or a community college or a technical school in Minnesota changes their life path. It creates a base from which our students can move forward to create a different kind of a life and be a productive member of society and at the same time make Minnesota a more economically vibrant state. Thank you.
And our thanks to Clark Johnson, DFL candidate, for that response. And now Tim Giesecke, the Independence Party candidate.
Thank you. Yeah, as the cost of higher education is increasing, and the share of the state is being reduced, it definitely puts a burden on the students and to meet the needs of the business community. But nothing's probably going through a more evolution right now than higher education. A quick example is a Stanford professor offered an online course for free, and 160,000 people from 190 countries enrolled into his artificial intelligence course last year. It just opened up his whole world on what higher education may become. These so-called MOOCs, as the acronym is pushing through universities, technical colleges, and we're going to have to look at how our universities are going to compete at that level. We need an on-campus experience, I believe. It may look different in a few years, but as we look at technical schools and bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, we need to partner with the corporate world as well, and maybe look at their interests and how even accreditation processes might change in the future. If I'm allowed to take accounting degrees from Stanford and other degrees, physics degree or classes from Harvard, if that is allowed to open to the masses now, how does the state of Minnesota compete with that? How do we keep our universities viable? And how do we allow this opportunity for those with no money and those with a lot of money that can almost receive an equal education now? So the evolution of the higher ed is probably going through a change bigger than many of us could even imagine 5 years ago. And I think that all has to be on the table as we fund higher ed and as the universities do need more money to reduce the costs. I think that that 5-year vision, 10-year vision on what higher education is in the future needs to be definitely considered.
Thank you, Tim Giesecke, the Independence Party candidate. And now our next response from Alan Quist, Republican candidate.
Well, and Keith, thank you for the question. It is an excellent question and one of the very important questions that's being asked. And let me first mention, again, that I was author of the bill that created the Minnesota Department of Jobs and Training. And what that bill did is that it bent over backwards to match the job needs of the employers in Minnesota with the job skills or the lack of them in people that couldn't find work in order to help people become self-sufficient and contributing members of society rather than simply getting welfare checks. And so I worked very, very closely with all of the institutions of higher learning, especially the vocational schools, in order to make that match workable. So there's no stronger advocate and proponent of good education, including vocational education, than I am. At the same time, I do not think that the governor's approach of raising taxes is constructive, because as you raise taxes, you also reduce job opportunities, and you have to have a match. You have to have a match between employment opportunities and skills. And there's no point in hurting one for the benefit of the other. The fact of the matter is that as funding for higher education has declined, funding in other areas of the state have grown, and in some cases have grown in a way that is unjustifiable and where much of the money is being misappropriated. And I don't think I need to tell you that right now in Minnesota we are spending $8.5 billion a year on Medicaid, and that is far more than what we're spending on higher education. And unfortunately, the Medicaid, the way that Medicaid is being administered is so awful that the federal government is now doing an audit. And so we have to get our house in order where we really are wasting money, so we have funds available for high priority items, and education should be the highest priority for state government.
Thank you, Alan Quist, Republican candidate. You're listening to KTOE's State House 19A Candidate Forum, brought to you by S&S Thermodynamics, where hot and cold get along, by Nicollet County Bank, a small-town community bank, but we're big on you, and by Patrick's on 3rd in St. Peter. We'll have our next question and all three candidates' answers in just a moment. I'm Wendy Wild, and you're listening to a special edition of Talk of the Town. Today, it's KTOE's State House 19A Candidate Forum. And, of course, that special election coming rapidly up on this Tuesday. And we will bring you coverage and results as well on KTOE, so we hope you'll join us for that. Now we have our second question, which is posed by John Woodwick. He is the executive director of the Minnesota Valley Action Council.
There are more people joining the ranks of the financially struggling every day. According to the recently released 2011 poverty data from the U.S. Census Bureau, the poverty rate jumped to 12.6% in 2011, meaning nearly 28,000 people were struggling below the poverty line in south central Minnesota. Since 2000, the number of people slipping from the middle class into poverty increased 71.6% in this area. The President of the United States nor the Governor of Minnesota addressed the issue. They both mentioned the middle class, but nothing about the people who have slipped from that status into poverty. What policies will you promote, if elected, that will address the issues of the poor? Keep in mind, a majority of the poor are children and the elderly.
And our first response comes from Independence Party candidate Tim Giesecke.
Thank you, John, for that question. And definitely a challenge in our economy. The state is tight on money, and at the same time, they need to, are asked to provide more. I'm familiar with some of the work the Minnesota Valley Action Council does, and I've heard testimony on that, and it's very intriguing testimonial on kind of that edge that the people live on, that they just need that helping hand to move up, and what is that policy that pulls them up? I favor policies that go toward outcomes, and when you deal with social issues, outcomes are a lot harder to address than when you deal with other more tangible outcomes. So I would focus on, how do we get, personal and professional outcomes for these individuals that either lost their job or have been pushed into poverty by some issue outside their control. I think, the children definitely need their health care on those situations, but also, we need to look at why they're what are the opportunities for those 26,000 peoples in the region? Are they missing some education? Are they missing some skills? And even back to the last question, we talk about higher ed as a group of people, but really in today's world, higher ed can be brought very cheap to even people in poverty. And I would look to policies that organize be able to bring some skills to these individuals, to maybe get some hands-on, whether they're, find out where their skill level is and introduce them to maybe a higher level skill. Some people that are unemployed, what's the criteria for them to receive unemployment? It would, maybe even look at providing, a step up in increasing their education rather than just, looking for work. So some opportunities in that area.
Thank you, Tim Giesecke, the Independence Party candidate, and now Alan Quist, the Republican candidate.
Well, John, again, thank you for the question. I really think this is the number one question facing the legislature, and I'd like to see this written on the walls of the Capitol and on the walls of the state office building or on the computer screens of all the legislators, because I think this is question number one. And you go back to the year 2000, which is a good year to go back to and point out that the poverty rate has increased in this area by 71.6% from 2000 to 2013. I mean, that's a horrific number. So why has this happened? And let me just mention here, you mentioned also the children in poverty. The reason we've got children in poverty is because their parents can't find employment, or they can't find employment at a wage where they can provide for their family. And so the number one answer to poverty is the opportunity for meaningful, well-paid jobs. And so really the question is, how do we have job growth? Well, again, going back to the year 2000, which is the year that you raised, and appropriately so. In the year 2000, the United States ranked 4th in the world on the Economic Freedom Index. Today, we have slipped down to 10th in the world on Economic Freedom Index. In the year 2000, the year that you cite, and properly so, the United States had a growth rate of 4%. Today, in the last 2 years, we've had a growth rate of 2%. And so the economy simply is not growing fast enough to generate employment. Why is that? It's because we've put too many barriers on small businesses that stand in the way of their being able to expand. And so you don't want to put more taxes on them like the tax on services, because that's going to make it even tougher. So the state of Minnesota needs to put together a good, comprehensive economic growth plan. And that plan doesn't exist. I will play a key role in putting it together, because more jobs, better jobs, higher paying jobs is the answer that we need to be pursuing.
Thank you, Republican candidate Alan Quist. And now our third response from DFL candidate Clark Johnson.
This is a serious issue to me. I'll be real open. I hate poverty. I think it's intolerable, and I think it's something that we have to collectively work to fight against. I had the honor of working at Minnesota Valley Action Council for a couple of years in the 80s, and I learned a lot about how complicated it is to live in poverty, that there's just amazing obstacles for people facing poverty to progress. And so the community action model of helping people help themselves is a good one to build from. And I think in a couple of specific areas that we can help people help themselves is one through education. It's a long-term solution to the challenge, and I think particularly in support of early childhood education. I'm very glad that the governor is supporting a significant increase in funding for early childhood education. Research clearly shows that helps kids improve their performance in school. And it will help us bridge the achievement gap that is quite large in Minnesota between poor kids and not so poor kids, and that's an important step. Healthy kids do well in school. I'm also excited by the potential for Minnesota to expand Medicaid to tens of thousands of people, many of those children. And at the same time, because of the new federal rules under the Affordable Health Care Act, save $1 billion in so doing. I think that's a step in the right direction and holds a great deal of promise to help us have healthy kids and better educated kids. I'm particularly sensitive to the elderly. Nicollet County's got a lot of elderly folks, and it's important to help those folks stay in their homes and also to support the family caregivers who are helping them live a good lifestyle as they age. Fundamentally, it's a matter of a united, caring community working with the state and other governmental agencies to address this very significant problem we call poverty.
Thank you, DFL candidate Clark Johnson. I'm Wendy Wild. You're listening to KTOE's State House 19A Candidate Forum. Our thanks to our sponsors, S&S Thermodynamics, where hot and cold get along, Nicollet County Bank, a small-town community bank, but we're big on you, and Patrick's on 3rd in St. Peter. We'll have our third and final question in just a moment. Thank you for listening to Talk of the Town today, the KTOE State House 19A Candidate Forum. And our third question, kind of a speed round, and it's short, sweet, and to the point. And Alan Quist, our Republican candidate, will answer first the question, who has endorsed you?
Okay. Well, again, good question. And I'm going to define this question fairly broadly because many of the groups that you work with in the legislature don't formally endorse. They're nonprofits, and they technically can't formally endorse. And I once asked the Chamber of Commerce about an endorsement, and they said, well, we always give you sky-high ratings, and we consider that to be our endorsement. And so I'm going to interpret the question broadly in terms of what groups give you high ratings. And the Chamber of Commerce has always given me very, very high ratings. Any group concerned with job creation and any group concerned with keeping taxes low has always given me high ratings. Groups that want to protect our Constitution, follow the Constitution, limited government, give me high ratings. Second Amendment groups, pro-family, pro-life groups give me high ratings. I even have on my wall an award from the American Heart Association for work I did on the non-smoking bill in the schools, which was my bill. And that's an endorsement of a sort. And so those are the groups that like who I am and like my work. And the focus is opportunity, job creation, and economic growth.
Thank you. Alan Quist, our next response from DFL candidate Clark Johnson.
Politics is a matter of bringing together people to get the job done and build a better future for all Minnesotans. I'm part of the people who are backing me, endorsing me. It starts with local leaders, people I think you know well. Tim Walz, Kathy Breinert, Kathy Sharon, Ruth Johnson, Don Ostrom, and Terry Morrow. These folks are all backing me in this election. I'm pleased to have the support of organizations recognizing my commitment to education, our Education Minnesota and the Interfaculty Association. Recognizing my commitment to the family farm is the Minnesota Farmers Union PAC. Recognizing my commitment to working families is the Minnesota AFL-CIO with associated unions of AFSCME, the Carpenters, the IBEW, MAPE, and SEIU. And finally, recognizing my commitment to equality is Outfront Minnesota and Project 515. I will seek to bring these people and others together to build a brighter future for all Minnesotans.
Thank you, DFL candidate Clark Johnson. And our final response from Independence Party candidate Tim Giesecke.
Oh, thank you. I found the PAC endorsement process very helpful in the last 30 days here. I received obviously many screening and interview materials from them, and it was somewhat of a challenge because some of the language that is used does kind of put you in a partisan side immediately, and in fact, I even commented to several of them if they put the endorsements online on an essay question, I'd be happy to answer them all. But so it's as an Independence Party candidate, we don't are allowed to bring in PAC dollars. So during the interview process, I did engage well, learn with the local representatives of those unions and so forth. They did, at the end of the conversation, did say that our recommendations will be looked at by the state, but the state does make the final call. So I am endorsed by the Independence Party, and I would, look forward to seeing how these other parties or these other PACs interact if I am elected. But overall, I think it's a good mix, but I think it's a little too partisan to begin with.
All right. Tim Giesecke, Independence Party candidate. And we went a little longer this time because our questions were, I think, a little more involved. And we have just time to say thank you to each of you for coming. Alan Quist, our pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Tim Giesecke.
Yeah, thank you for the time. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. And Clark Johnson, thank you so much.
Equally, thank you.
And special thanks to Jeff Hendricks, our KTOE webmaster, who's videotaping, and we will get that video online, I'm going to promise, by Saturday for sure. And Dwayne McGaw, our program director, who has technically run the show today. And thanks as well to Pete Steiner for giving us the time. Our thanks to our sponsors, S&S Thermodynamics, where hot and cold get along, Nicollet County Bank, a small town community bank, but we're big on you, and Patrick's on Third in St. Peter. I'm Wendy Wild.